The first day of school was supposed to be a momentous occasion, but for me, it felt like the beginning of a battle I wasn't prepared for. I was older than most of the other children in my class, a fact I had always been acutely aware of. My family couldn't afford to send me to school when I was younger, and by the time I could, I had already grown too old to be with children my age. Still, my desire for an education had driven me to this point, to this small-town school, the only one I could afford. Standing at the school gates, my heart raced with excitement and fear. The world outside seemed so much bigger than the narrow streets I had grown up on. I glanced at my father, who stood next to me. His clothes were worn, patched in several places, and his shoes were practically falling apart. But despite his ragged appearance, I knew he had sacrificed so much to get me here. For months, he had saved every penny from his meager salary, cutting back on his own needs just so I could attend school. He never once complained. He never once showed how tired he was, how much he had given up for this one chance. "Dad, I promise I'll make you proud," I whispered under my breath, my voice catching. He gave me a small smile, his tired eyes betraying a flicker of hope. His smile was brief, almost as if he were afraid that if he smiled too much, he would break down. But I could feel his silent encouragement, and it gave me strength. I wiped away a tear that had started to form in my eye and turned toward the school. I felt as though this moment would be the beginning of everything changing. My hopes soared as I stepped onto the school grounds. It was a place where I believed dreams could be made real, where I could finally escape the poverty that had shackled my family for so long. But as I approached the principal's office, reality hit me like a cold splash of water. I walked in with my head held high, but the principal's gaze stopped me in my tracks. She looked me up and down, her eyes scanning my body in a way that felt more like a judgment than an assessment. She seemed surprised at first, but the surprise quickly turned to something else, something colder. "This child cannot study here," she said, her voice firm and without a trace of empathy. "She is disabled. She won't be able to keep up with the other students." Her words felt like a slap across my face. I had come to this school with so much hope, only to be told that my disability, my birth defect, the fact that I had been born with one leg, meant I wasn't worthy of an education. It wasn't just the words, it was the way she said them, dismissing me without even trying to understand me. My father stood beside me, his face crumpled with the weight of disappointment. He started to explain, his voice trembling with a mix of frustration and helplessness. "Please, just give her a chance," he begged. "She wants to learn. She deserves a chance like any other child." The principal didn't seem moved. She sighed heavily, as though she had already made up her mind. "I don't know. This school has standards," she said, looking away as if the decision was already final. But my father didn't give up. He persisted, explaining that he had saved for months, sacrificing everything, just to make this possible for me. "I promise you she will work hard. Please, just give her a chance." After a long silence, the principal finally relented, though it was clear she was only agreeing out of obligation. "Fine," she said reluctantly, "but don't expect much." My heart soared with relief. I had made it. Despite everything, despite the judgment, I was in. I could barely contain my excitement. But the moment the words left the principal's lips, I knew that this was just the beginning. I would have to prove myself every day. The excitement I had felt walking through the school gates quickly started to fade as I made my way to the classroom. My legs, which were supported by 2 wooden crutches, felt weak. They had been my lifeline for as long as I could remember, but walking with them, no matter how familiar it was, still left me feeling exposed. As I entered the room, I could feel every eye on me. It wasn't a welcoming gaze, but one filled with curiosity, judgment, and, I feared, mockery. I took my seat in the back of the classroom, hoping that the teacher would overlook me, that I could blend into the background and just focus on my studies. But it wasn't that easy. I heard whispers, laughter. "Look at her! She's crippled," one boy muttered. "What is she even doing here?" I wanted to shrink into my seat, to disappear, but I couldn't. I had to stay. I had to fight. But it wasn't just the students. The teacher, too, seemed to ignore me. Her gaze barely lingered in my direction, and when she spoke, her voice was distant, unkind. She didn't look at me the way she looked at the other children. It was as though I didn't exist, as though I didn't matter. That silence hurt more than the laughter, more than the cruel words. The rest of the day passed in a blur. Each minute dragged on longer than the last. The children whispered behind my back, and I could hear their laughter. Some of it was quiet, like a low hum, but others made no effort to hide their ridicule. One boy even pointed at me, making exaggerated limping gestures with his hands. It was hard to focus on the lessons with the weight of their scorn on my shoulders. I was constantly aware of their eyes, their laughter, their whispers. I wasn't just learning the subjects. I was learning how it felt to be the object of pity, to be treated like something less than human. When the final bell rang, I didn't wait for anyone. I grabbed my crutches and hobbled out of the classroom as quickly as I could. I wanted to escape the stares, the laughter, the silence. The world outside seemed as cold as the classroom. My heart felt heavy, weighed down by the cruelty I had experienced. I wasn't sure what hurt more, the physical exhaustion from using my crutches all day or the emotional weight of being rejected. When I got home, I didn't speak. I couldn't. I ran straight to my mother and buried my face in her arms, letting the tears fall. I sobbed uncontrollably, unable to hold it in any longer. She held me tightly, not asking questions, just letting me cry. "What happened?" she asked softly, her voice full of concern. "I don't belong there," I whispered, my voice shaky. "The kids made fun of me. They laughed at me. They said I shouldn't be there. I don't fit in. I'm different." She stroked my hair gently, and her voice was soft, full of love. "No one can take away your dreams. You are special. You have a purpose. Don't let anyone make you feel less than you are." Her words were comforting, but they didn't take away the pain. I wanted to believe her, but it was hard. It was so hard. The world had already told me I didn't belong. How could I change that? How could I make them see me for who I truly was? Would I ever find a way to make my dreams come true? Section 2. A terrible incident. I had always dreamed of studying, of making something of myself despite the challenges. But when I started school, I quickly realized how difficult it was to make my dreams come true. The children in my class made it impossible to fit in. They mocked me for being older than them. They called me Auntie because I was 5 years older than most of them. They laughed at my disability, and it became the target of their cruel jokes. Every day was a constant battle to maintain my dignity, a struggle just to survive in an environment that should have been a place of learning and growth. It was painful. Each day as I walked through the hallways, I felt their eyes on me, whispering behind my back. When they saw my crutches, they would laugh. Sometimes they would even throw things at me, pencils, erasers, or worse, small stones. It wasn't just the physical abuse, it was the emotional toll that drained me. I tried to ignore it, telling myself I was here to study, to learn, to rise above it. But it wasn't easy, not by a long shot. During lunchtime, the other children would sit together, eating their favorite dishes, sandwiches, fruit, chips, and more. I would watch them from a distance, my mouth watering, wishing I could have the same. At home, we didn't have the luxury of such variety. The meals we had were basic, just enough to fill our stomachs for the day. We never had enough to waste, never had the extra to enjoy. My father worked hard, but it was never enough to afford luxuries like other children had. I could never be part of their world, the world of abundance and carefree happiness. I always ate alone, my food modest, while they laughed and joked together, enjoying the things I could only dream of. One day, things got worse, much worse. As I was leaving school, a group of mischievous boys and girls came up to me. They were always up to something, always looking for someone to bully. That day it was me. They surrounded me, laughing, taunting. One of them grabbed my school bag and yanked it from my shoulders. I struggled to hold on to it, but they were too strong. They pulled it away from me, and in the process, they dropped all my books on the ground. The laughter grew louder. I bent down to collect my books, my hands trembling, feeling the heat of embarrassment wash over me. But it didn't stop there. The bullying escalated. One of the boys, laughing with the others, grabbed my crutch. He yanked it out of my hand and threw it across the yard, watching as I struggled to stay balanced. I tried to keep my composure, but my heart was racing, and I could feel the tears starting to sting my eyes. The children laughed louder, as though this was all some sort of game. They thought it was funny to watch me struggle. But this wasn't a game to me. With one crutch gone, I limped awkwardly, trying to regain some sense of control, but before I could get back on my feet, one of the boys shoved me. I fell to the ground, my knees scraping against the rough pavement. The world around me seemed to blur. I could hear them laughing as they walked away, leaving me on the ground. They didn't care. To them, I was just some easy target, some spectacle to mock. But things didn't end there. As I lay on the ground, I heard footsteps approaching. I looked up, and before I could even react, a boy grabbed my crutch and threw it even farther, out of the school grounds, into the street. I felt a wave of panic. I had no way of moving without it. My hands, scraped and bruised from the fall, shook as I tried to get up. The other children continued to laugh. They were relentless. I tried to stand up, but my balance was off. I couldn't get to my feet without my crutches, and in that moment I felt utterly helpless. The humiliation of being tossed aside, of being treated like I wasn't even human, was unbearable. My body shook with anger, frustration, and a deep sadness that seemed to consume me. How could they be so cruel? How could they treat me like this? I wanted to scream, but my voice was lost in the sea of laughter around me. It felt like no one cared. I looked around for help, but the teachers weren't around, and none of the other children seemed interested in helping. I could hear the sound of the bell signaling the end of the day, but I wasn't ready to leave. I couldn't move. My heart felt like it was sinking into my stomach, and all I wanted was to disappear. As the day turned to evening, the school slowly emptied out. The hallways were quiet, but I was still trapped in the classroom. I was alone. The door had been locked, and no one had bothered to check on me. I banged on the door, calling for help, but my voice echoed in the empty building. The cold was starting to creep in, and I could feel the chill settling deep in my bones. I was terrified. The darkness outside seemed to mock me. It felt like I would never escape this nightmare. I was exhausted, physically and emotionally. I had no energy left, no will to keep fighting. I began to lose hope. Maybe I wasn't meant to survive this. Maybe this was how my life was supposed to end, alone, abandoned, discarded like trash. But then, I heard a voice. My father. He had come looking for me. He had been searching the streets, asking around, trying to find out where I was. When he arrived at the school, he didn't hesitate. He forced the door open and pulled me out. His eyes were filled with concern, but there was also a fire in them. A fire that made me believe he would fight for me, no matter what. I collapsed into his arms, feeling the weight of everything finally lift off my shoulders. The next morning, my father went straight to the principal's office. He was furious, demanding that something be done about the bullying. He couldn't understand why the school had let this happen. But the principal wasn't interested in hearing his complaints. She dismissed him, brushing him off as if his concerns didn't matter. He wasn't the first parent to complain about the bullying, but she didn't take action. That's when it all changed. As my father and I were leaving the principal's office, a man appeared in front of us. He was well-dressed, his clothes expensive, and there was an air of arrogance about him. He introduced himself as the father of one of the boys who had been involved in the bullying. Without warning, he slapped my father across the face. It was a hard slap, one that made me flinch. The man was angry. "If you ever accuse my son again, I'll make sure you regret it," he spat, his words venomous. I couldn't stand it anymore. I was already broken, humiliated, and exhausted. But watching my father be slapped by this man pushed me over the edge. I was disabled, but that didn't mean I was weak. That didn't mean I didn't have the strength to fight back. I rushed forward despite my crutches, and I hit him with all the force I could muster. My anger and pain fueled every movement. "How dare you?" I shouted, my voice trembling with rage. "How dare you lay a hand on my father? You people are all the same. You let money blind you to what's right. You treat people like they're nothing because you think you can get away with it." The man was stunned for a moment, but then he stepped back, his face contorting with fury. "You're lucky you're just a cripple, or I'd teach you a lesson," he spat, his words dripping with contempt. But I didn't back down. I stood my ground, ready to fight. The school expelled both me and my father that day. They didn't care about what had happened. They didn't care about the abuse I had endured. I was the problem. I was the one who didn't belong. No one wanted me at their school anymore. My family had nowhere to turn. My mother often told me that education and success were reserved for the rich, that people like us, the poor, the disabled, had no place in that world. She said that the reality for people like us was just to survive, to scrape by with the few things life handed us, and to let our dreams fade into the background of the daily struggle. People like us, she would say, live a life of wishes, never reality. Our dreams are for the privileged. We are just meant to make it through each day. Her words felt like a weight around my neck, suffocating the hope I tried to hold on to. Yet, no matter how many times I heard her speak those words, I refused to accept them. My heart wouldn't allow it. I couldn't give up. I couldn't stop believing that one day I could be more than the sum of my circumstances. Despite everything, despite what my mother said, I still believed in a different future. A future where I wasn't defined by my disability, where I wasn't confined to a life of hardship. I would remind her often, no matter how hard life gets, it won't last forever. There will be a bright day ahead. She would look at me with the same tired eyes, those eyes that had seen too much pain to truly hope anymore, and she would sigh, saying nothing. I knew she loved me, but sometimes I felt as though she had given up, as though she had resigned herself to the harsh realities of our world. My father, however, always saw things differently. Despite everything, despite the constant struggle, he believed in me. He believed in the possibility of a better life. He never let his circumstances define him, and he would never let them define me. I could see it in his eyes whenever he looked at me. His love for me was so deep, so pure, that it became the foundation of everything I believed in. He was my rock, the one person who truly understood me, and his strength became my own. Every morning my father would wake up before dawn to open the small, humble shop he worked at. It was a tiny space, no bigger than a cupboard, tucked away on the corner of a narrow street. He worked tirelessly there, cleaning and maintaining the place, doing everything he could to keep it running. He didn't have much, but what he had, he gave. Even though we struggled, he would always make sure there was enough for me. Some days, when business was slow, he would come home with nothing but his sweat-soaked clothes and a heart full of exhaustion. But I knew he would never show how tired he was. He would never show me the weight of the world on his shoulders. He didn't want me to see him break. There were days when he would return home with a bag of leftover food, the kind that people at the restaurant across the street from his shop would throw away. They would leave it outside the bin, scraps and leftovers no one wanted, thinking no one would come by to take them. But my father would, his face set with determination, collect what he could, bring it home, and divide it between us. Sometimes it was just a few pieces of bread, sometimes some vegetables, or a small piece of meat. But it was enough. He would set it on the table with a quiet smile, saying, "This will do for today, my love." And we would eat together as a family, grateful for what we had, even if it was so little. Despite the struggles, despite the days when our meal was nothing more than dry bread and water, my father never let it show. He always smiled at me, always spoke words of encouragement, always told me that one day I would rise above all of this. "You are meant for more than this life," he would say, his voice soft but full of certainty. "This is just a chapter in your story. The best is yet to come." And I believed him. I had to, because if I didn't, I feared I might lose myself completely. His love, his hope, and his belief in me kept me going. He didn't care that I had only one leg. He didn't care that I couldn't run like the other children, or that I had to rely on crutches to walk. He saw me for who I truly was, not for my disability, not for the poverty we lived in, but for the dreams I held in my heart. There were moments when I would catch myself looking at other families, seeing how easy their lives seemed, seeing them walk without the burden of poverty or disability. I would watch them laugh together, their faces lit up with joy. And it would hurt. It would sting in a way I couldn't explain. They had everything: money, comfort, stability. I didn't have any of that. Sometimes I would ask myself if I was truly destined for more, or if I was simply fooling myself, clinging to a hope that didn't exist. But every time those doubts crept in, I would remember my father, his strength, his belief in me, his love. That was enough to silence the doubts. One day, when I was struggling with these questions, I overheard a conversation between my parents. I had been sitting in the living room trying to do my homework when I heard my mother's voice, tired and resigned, saying, "She wants to be something more, but I don't think she understands. The world doesn't work like that. You can't rise above your circumstances when everything is stacked against you." My father's voice was calm, but there was a firmness to it that made me sit up straight. "She's not like us," he said. "She has a fire in her that I can't explain. She's going to make something of herself. I know it." My heart swelled with love for him in that moment. He was my greatest supporter, my greatest cheerleader. Even when everything around us was falling apart, he believed in me. And his belief was everything. But there were moments when the weight of our struggles would threaten to crush us. There were times when my father's face would betray his exhaustion, when I would see him collapse into the chair at the end of the day, his shoulders slumped, his hands shaking. I would try to help, try to do something, but there was nothing I could do to ease his pain. All I could do was be there. All I could do was offer my love, my hope, my faith in him. There were nights when we went to bed hungry, when my father would apologize for not being able to provide more. I would hug him, my small arms wrapped tightly around his broad shoulders, and tell him, "It's okay, Papa. We have each other. That's enough." And it was. It always was. One particularly difficult evening, when my father came home looking more exhausted than usual, I noticed he had something in his hands. It was a small, worn-out book, the pages yellowed with age. He handed it to me with a tired smile. "This is for you," he said, his voice soft. "I found it in the shop. It's not much, but I thought you might like it." I opened the book, and inside I found a collection of stories of people who had overcome impossible odds, who had fought through adversity and emerged victorious. It was nothing special, just a simple book. But to me, it was everything. It was a reminder that no matter how hard life got, there was always hope, always a way forward. My father sat beside me as I flipped through the pages, his arm around me. "You see," he said, his voice full of emotion, "this is the kind of life I want for you. A life where you don't just survive, you thrive. You will be better than any of us, I promise you." In that moment, I realized that my father had already given me everything I needed to succeed. It wasn't the material things, the food, or the comforts of life. It was his love, his unwavering belief that I could overcome anything. That, more than anything, was the foundation of my strength. We may not have had much, but we had each other, and that, I knew, was enough. My father loved me deeply, and despite all the hardships, he never gave up on me. He believed that I deserved a chance, a real chance, at a future that wasn't defined by my disability or our poverty. After everything that had happened, after the humiliation I faced at the old school, he found another place where I could learn. One evening, after a long day at the shop, my father sat me down with a serious expression. His face was tired, his eyes heavy with exhaustion. But there was something in his gaze that told me this was important. He told me that he had spoken with a new school, one that was willing to accept me. "I've made sure you have another chance," he said quietly, his voice full of determination. For a moment, I couldn't believe it. How could this be real? I had been turned away before. My disability, my old clothes, my crutches. Would any school really let me in? But looking at my father's face, seeing the quiet strength in his eyes, I felt something inside me stir. Maybe this time it could be different. We went to the new school the next week. The principal was kind, far kinder than I had ever expected. She didn't hesitate when she saw me with my crutches. She didn't make me feel small or less than the other kids. She didn't even blink when she saw how worn my uniform was, how old my shoes were. Instead, she welcomed me with open arms, telling me that she would make sure I had the opportunity to study, regardless of my situation. I had never met someone like her before, someone who didn't just see my disability, but saw me. She looked past my worn clothes and my disability and saw my desire to learn. I could hardly believe it when she shook my hand and told me I was welcome. For the first time in a long while, I felt like I mattered. But while the school may have been a fresh start, the road ahead wasn't going to be easy. I didn't have the shiny new uniform like the other kids. I didn't have neat iron clothes or the fancy backpack that everyone else seemed to have. My father could only do so much. He worked tirelessly, but the money just wasn't there for luxuries like that. Still, I was determined to make the best of this opportunity. On my first day, I walked into the classroom, crutches in hand, heart racing. I could feel the eyes of the other students on me, some curious, others judgmental. I knew I looked different. My clothes were old, my shoes were scuffed, and my crutches were clumsy, tapping loudly on the floor as I walked. Some of the kids stared openly, and I could hear whispers as I passed them. "Why does she look like that?" one girl asked, her voice low but sharp enough for me to hear. "Does she even belong here?" The words stung, but I kept walking, ignoring the taunts. I had heard it all before. I didn't let it stop me. At the back of my mind, my father's words played over and over. "You are more than this. You are more than they see." That first week was hard. Some kids were kind, but most kept their distance. The teasing was subtle at first. Snide comments, whispered laughs, and the occasional cruel remark. I didn't have the things they had, and that made me an easy target. They would stare at my old, faded clothes and my worn-out shoes, and I could feel the weight of their judgment. I remember one boy who would sneak glances at me, then turn to his friends with a smirk, muttering loud enough for me to hear, "She doesn't even look like she belongs here." I could feel the heat rise in my cheeks, but I didn't let myself cry. I wanted to, badly. I wanted to escape back to the comfort of my home, where I didn't have to deal with the cruelty of others. But I couldn't let myself. I couldn't let those kids make me feel small again. I had to prove to myself and to them that I was more than my circumstances. My focus was on my studies. I worked harder than anyone else. Every time I felt my heart sink, every time the teasing got to me, I reminded myself of the reason I was there, to learn to make something of myself. And slowly things started to change, not all at once, but over time. Some of the students began to notice that I wasn't like the others. Yes, I had a disability, and yes, my clothes weren't new, but I didn't let that stop me. I threw myself into my studies. I helped other students with their homework, answered questions when I could, and stayed after class when I needed help. I worked harder than I ever had before. As I focused on my work, something unexpected happened. A few of the kids began to warm up to me. I wasn't the girl who was different anymore. I was the girl who helped, the girl who cared, the girl who didn't let anything hold her back. Slowly, the teasing turned into respect. One by one, the students who had once laughed at me began to see me for who I truly was. They saw my dedication, my drive, and my willingness to help. One day, a girl named Sarah approached me at lunch. She had been one of the ones who mocked me at first, but now she smiled shyly and asked, "Do you want to sit with us?" I was taken aback. I didn't know how to respond at first. It felt so surreal, like something out of a dream. But I smiled, nodding, and joined her and her friends. It was a small moment, but for me, it meant everything. It meant that I wasn't alone anymore. It meant that someone saw me for who I was. From that day on, things started to improve. Slowly, I made new friends, and the teasing died down. My classmates started to see the real me, the girl who loved to learn, the girl who cared about others, the girl who didn't let anything stop her. My father noticed the change in me. Every day after school, he would ask me about my day. When I told him about the friends I had made, he would smile, that quiet, proud smile of his. "I knew you could do it," he would say. "You've always had it in you." I didn't know how to thank him, how to explain what his belief in me had done. He had never given up on me, even when everything seemed impossible. I knew now, more than ever, that his love and belief in me were what had carried me through the hardest moments of my life. But even with everything getting better, I knew this wasn't the end of the journey. There would be more challenges ahead, more moments when I would feel out of place, when I would question whether I truly belonged. But I also knew that with my Father's love and my own determination, I could face whatever came my way. One day, my father came home with a small package in his hands. "This is for you," he said, his voice soft. Inside, I found a new uniform, one that fit me perfectly. It was simple, but to me, it was the most beautiful thing in the world. "You deserve this," he said, his eyes full of love and pride. I hugged him tightly, tears filling my eyes. This wasn't just about the uniform. It was about everything he had done for me, everything he had given me. And in that moment, I knew that no matter what happened, I would always be okay. With him by my side, I could conquer anything. It was a cold, rainy night when everything started to fall apart. My little brother, Allie, had been complaining about a stomachache earlier that day, but we thought it was just a minor issue, something that would pass with rest. But as the evening wore on, his pain seemed to get worse. He clutched his belly, groaning softly, and his face turned pale. We tried to comfort him, but it was clear that something was seriously wrong. The rain outside was relentless, beating against the windows with such force that it felt like the roof might give way. Inside, our small house seemed colder than usual. The roof leaked in places, and the dampness spread through the rooms, making the air thick and heavy. I could feel the chill in my bones, but it was nothing compared to what my brother must have been feeling. His fever spiked, and he started shivering uncontrollably. I remember my mother, her face pale with worry, holding him close, trying to warm him up with her own body heat. My father, ever the pillar of our family, looked helplessly at my brother, his hands trembling as he tried to comfort him. I could see the fear in my father's eyes. He had always been strong for us, never showing weakness. But this time, there was nothing he could do to make Allie better. The rain, the cold, the roof leaking, it all seemed like a cruel reminder of how little we had. We were already struggling, living from day to day, never having enough. And now, my little brother was so ill, and we had no money to get him the proper care he needed. Without a second thought, my parents rushed into action. My father, despite his exhaustion, grabbed Ali, and they both made their way out into the pouring rain, desperately trying to get to the nearest hospital. I stayed behind, watching from the window, praying that everything would be okay. I had no idea how we would afford any treatment, but all I could think about was Ali, shivering in my father's arms. The hospital was not far, but with the rain, it felt like an eternity. My parents finally arrived, but by the time they did, the doctor's reaction was harsh. He barely looked at my brother before dismissing him with a cold glance. "You should have come earlier," he said, his tone dripping with judgment. "It's too late now. We don't have time for cases like this. You should have brought him sooner." I remember the sting of those words, the way my parents' faces fell. It wasn't that we hadn't tried. It wasn't that we hadn't cared. We were just too poor to afford the luxury of good health care. The doctor, instead of offering help, only offered criticism. The humiliation was unbearable. My mother cried softly in the corner of the room, her face streaked with tears, while my father stood frozen, unable to do anything to change the situation. My brother, my little brother, was slipping away right before our eyes. And there was nothing we could do. Hours passed, and by the time the doctor finally came to check on Ali again, it was too late. My little brother, the one who had always been full of life, had stopped breathing. My father, ever so strong, was now broken, his eyes filled with tears he couldn't hide. My mother collapsed into his arms, her sobs echoing through the small room. The doctor's face was as indifferent as before, but my parents saw nothing but the emptiness in his eyes. There was no sympathy, no understanding of the pain we were feeling. It didn't matter that we had done everything in our power to save Ali. We were poor, and that made us invisible to the world. We buried my brother the next day. There was no money for a proper funeral, no way to honor him the way he deserved. All we could do was wrap him in the only cloth we could afford and lay him to rest. The ground was cold, the rain still falling, as though the heavens themselves were mourning with us. It was a quiet, painful goodbye. I couldn't stop the tears from flowing, but I also couldn't escape the numbness that had settled over me. I was losing my family piece by piece, and all I could do was stand there and watch. Things didn't get any better after that. In fact, they only seemed to get worse. My father, who had always been the one to hold us together, now seemed lost. He went back to his small cleaning job at a local shop, hoping that the few coins he earned there would be enough to feed us. But when he arrived at the store, he was met with a devastating surprise. The shop had hired someone new, someone younger, someone more energetic. My father was out of a job. He stood there, speechless, as his boss handed him his last paycheck and told him that they no longer needed him. There was no thank you or sorry, just a cold dismissal that left my father feeling like a failure. I watched him walk home that day, his shoulders slumped, his head down. He had always been the one who worked tirelessly for us, sacrificing his health and his happiness just to make sure we had enough to eat. And now, even that was gone. Our little family was falling apart, and it felt like there was nothing we could do to stop it. I remember that night like it was yesterday. We sat in the dim light of our small room, not saying much. My father had always been a quiet man, but now the silence between us was heavy. My mother sat next to him, her eyes empty, as if she had lost her will to keep fighting. The house was colder than ever, the leaky roof offering no protection from the rain that still beat down outside. We were hungry, cold, and broken. There were days when I couldn't stop thinking about how different things could have been. What if we hadn't been poor? What if my brother had gotten the treatment he needed? What if my father hadn't lost his job? But those thoughts only brought more pain, and I knew they wouldn't change anything. The reality of our situation was too harsh to ignore. We tried to survive, to keep going, but it felt like we were sinking deeper into despair with every passing day. My father tried to find another job, but the rejection was constant. He was too old, too slow, too broken by years of hard labor. And the more he tried, the more discouraged he became. There was no work for men like him, men who had already given everything they had, only to be discarded when they could no longer keep up with the world's demands. I wanted to help him, to make things better for all of us, but there was nothing I could do. I was just a child, just another burden in the house, unable to do anything but watch as my family fell apart. And yet, despite everything, my father never gave up. He still woke up every morning, still went out to search for work, still fought with every ounce of his being to provide for us. It wasn't enough, but it was all he could do. In the end, we were left with nothing but each other. But somehow, that was enough to keep going. My father may have lost his job, and my brother may have been taken from us, but the love we shared was something no one could take away. Even in the darkest moments, we had each other. I was sitting outside our small house, watching the children play. They were running around, kicking a football to each other, their laughter filling the air. I sat quietly, my gaze following them as they moved with such ease, their feet quick and light, the world open to them, full of possibilities. I couldn't help but feel a deep pang in my chest. My eyes followed the ball as it rolled past me, the children chasing after it without a care. In that moment, an overwhelming desire flooded my heart, one I could barely describe even to myself. I longed for something I could never have. I wish I could walk, I thought to myself. I wish I could run with them. I wish I could play football too, or just walk freely, without the constant struggle, without the need for support. If only I had 2 legs, like the other children. If only I could stand on my own, just like everyone else. I sat there for a long while, lost in my thoughts, watching them live their carefree lives, wishing so hard that I could trade places with them. I thought of how simple their world seemed, how easy it was for them to just run, to move about without hesitation. And here I was, stuck in this small body, unable to do the things they took for granted. I wasn't angry. It was just a feeling of helplessness, a longing for something I could never have, a simple wish to be like them, to walk, to run, to be free. My daydreams were interrupted by the sound of my father's voice. I turned to see him coming down the path toward me. His face, as always, was a mixture of strength and exhaustion. His hands were weathered from years of hard work, and his eyes carried the weight of all the struggles we had faced. His clothes were worn, and his step slower than it used to be, but he still carried himself with a certain dignity. I had always looked up to him, admired him for his resilience and his never-give-up attitude. But today, as he walked toward me, I didn't know that his life, too, was crumbling. "Lisa," he called softly, his voice filled with concern. "Why are you sitting out here alone? It's cold. You'll catch a chill. Come inside before you get sick." I didn't answer him immediately. I just sat there, feeling his gaze on me, knowing he was waiting for me to respond. I couldn't hide my tears anymore. The weight of everything, my disability, my family's struggles, my unfulfilled dreams, was too much to bear. Slowly I turned to him, and tears started to roll down my cheeks. Before I could say anything, I stood up and went to him, throwing myself into his arms. "Papa," I said, my voice shaking, I wish I could walk. I wish I could be like them. I wish I had 2 legs. I wish I could run and play and stand on my own without any help. I feel so useless, so different. I just want to be normal, like everyone else." I couldn't stop the tears. They came in waves, and my heart ached for the simple things I would never experience. I felt broken, like I didn't belong in a world that seemed so easy for everyone else. My father held me tight, pressing my head to his chest. I felt his warmth, his love, his heart beating strong against mine. Despite all the struggles we had faced, despite the hardships that had torn at the fabric of our family, he was still there for me. In that moment, his presence was the only thing that made me feel safe. "Lisa," he whispered, his voice soft but filled with determination. "You are not useless. You are my strength. You have always been my strength. You are more than your legs. Don't ever think otherwise. I know it's hard. I know you have dreams, things you want to do, things that seem impossible. But you, my daughter, have the power to make them come true. Believe me. If anyone can achieve what seems impossible, it's you." I clung to his words, even though they felt too big for me to understand fully. How could I possibly achieve anything when I couldn't even walk? How could I make my dreams come true when it felt like the world had already written my story without me in it? But there was something in his voice that made me believe him, even if just a little. He pulled away slightly, his hands holding my face, his eyes looking directly into mine. "Listen to me," he said, his tone more serious now. "Your wish, your dream to walk, I will make it come true, but I need you to promise me something." I looked at him surprised. "What do you mean? How will you make it happen, Papa?" "I will do everything in my power to make sure you have the opportunity to walk," he said, his voice unwavering. "But you must promise me something in return. Promise me that you will work hard, that you will never stop trying, no matter how difficult things get. Promise me that you will learn, you will grow, and you will make something of yourself. Promise me that you will never give up." I stared at him, feeling the weight of his words sink into my heart. I didn't know how he would make my dream come true, but I trusted him. He was my father. If anyone could make the impossible happen, it was him. And if he believed in me, maybe I should believe in myself too. "I promise, Papa," I said through my tears, my voice steadying. I promise I will work hard. I will study. I will never give up." He smiled, the kind of smile that reached his eyes, full of hope. He kissed my forehead, then placed his hand on my head. "That's my girl," he said softly. "You are stronger than you know. And together we will make your dreams come true. Just remember, your father is always here, and we will face everything together." In that moment, I felt a sense of peace wash over me. The longing, the ache for normalcy, still lingered, but my father's words gave me something else to hold on to. Hope, determination, a belief that maybe, just maybe, things could change. And as I sat back down beside him, feeling his hand gently resting on my shoulder, I realized that the road ahead wouldn't be easy. There would be challenges, there would be moments of doubt. But I wasn't alone. My father was with me, and together we would find a way to make it through. I may not have been able to walk today, but I knew deep in my heart that someday, with hard work, determination, and the love of my father, I would stand on my own 2 feet. Maybe not in the way I imagined, but in a way that was uniquely mine. The winter winds had started to bite, and the town was slowly getting ready for Christmas. The festive decorations were beginning to adorn the houses of the wealthier families, their windows sparkling with colorful lights. The streets, normally quiet and subdued, were now bustling with activity, filled with people shopping for presents and preparing for grand parties. The air smelled of pine and gingerbread, and the sound of Christmas carols played softly from store windows. But while the wealthy families prepared for the celebrations, my own home was far from festive. The truth was, Papa had been hiding something from us. He had lost his job a few weeks ago, and now every morning he would leave the house and come back late at night. I noticed the subtle changes in him, how his shoulders sagged a little more each day, how his smile wasn't as wide as it used to be. At first I thought he was just tired from the extra work he had taken on, but over time I realized it was more than that. The weight of his secret was starting to show. One evening, as the holiday spirit filled the air, Papa told us, "I've found some extra work, so I will be coming home even later now. There's more money to be made, and we need it." He smiled as he spoke, trying to reassure us, but I could sense the strain in his voice. He wasn't fooling anyone. He was working more than ever just to keep us afloat, but he was also hiding the reality of our financial situation. His job had been taken away, and the truth of it had hit him hard. But he didn't want to show it to us. Instead, he buried himself in work, hoping to make ends meet without us knowing. I noticed that he started staying out even later, returning home when the rest of us had already gone to bed. When he did come back, he would be exhausted, his face lined with fatigue, but he would always try to put on a brave face for us. It was his way of protecting us from the harsh reality he was dealing with. As Christmas approached, the town seemed to come alive with excitement, yet our small home remained quiet. I would often sit by the window, watching the glittering decorations in the distance, wishing we could be part of the joy the season brought. My heart ached every time I saw the beautiful Christmas parties being held in the grand houses across town. I could hear the music, the laughter, the clinking of glasses as families gathered to celebrate. And I couldn't help but feel left out, knowing that we wouldn't be part of that world. One evening, I couldn't stand it any longer. I decided to sneak out of the house. I wanted to see the grand Christmas party with my own eyes, to feel the magic of the season, even if it was from a distance. My legs, as always, depended on the crutches to support me, but I had become accustomed to walking with them. The night was cold, the streets covered in a thin layer of snow, but I didn't mind. I was determined to see the Christmas festivities. I made my way toward the wealthier part of town, carefully stepping through the snow-covered streets. My crutches, though usually dependable, kept getting stuck in the snow, making it difficult to walk. My heart raced as I drew closer to the grand houses, and I couldn't help but feel a mixture of excitement and sadness. I wanted to be part of that world, even if just for a moment. But as I walked along, one of my crutches got caught in the snow, and I lost my balance. I fell hard, hitting the ground with a thud. The pain was sharp, but I didn't mind. What hurt more was the realization that I would never be able to walk freely, like the children I had seen running through the streets, or the people who could move without a second thought. From where I had fallen, I could see a group of children playing in the park nearby. The bright lights of a Christmas party lit up the area, and I could hear the sounds of laughter and joy. It was beautiful, and for a moment I forgot about my pain. I watched as the children danced and played, their faces lit up with excitement. Among them, I saw a man dressed as Santa Claus. He was laughing and dancing, and the children were thrilled to see him. They crowded around him, playfully pushing each other to get closer to him, their eyes wide with excitement. Santa Claus was the centerpiece of the celebration. He made everyone laugh with his silly dances, his exaggerated movements, and the joy he brought. He was the one who made the party come alive, the one who brought the spirit of Christmas to the children. I watched, mesmerized, as he twirled around with them, lifting some of the little ones onto his shoulders. The joy was contagious. The children cheered, jumping up and down, delighted by his antics. I sat there on the ground, watching in awe. For a moment, I allowed myself to dream. What if I could join them? What if I could be part of this world where people danced and laughed freely? I had always watched from the sidelines, never able to take part in such carefree moments. But for once, I allowed myself to believe that maybe, just maybe, one day I could be part of it. The sight of Santa Claus and the laughter of the children filled my heart with warmth. It was a brief moment of joy, a fleeting escape from the harsh reality of my life. But as the party went on, I knew I couldn't stay. I had to go back home. My legs were aching, my body was cold, and the snow was making it difficult to walk. I got up, carefully making my way back toward the street, my crutches digging into the snow with every step. But as I walked back, I couldn't help but feel a sense of longing. I want to be like them, I thought to myself. I want to run, to dance, to live without the limitations that my body places on me. I want to feel the joy that comes from being free, from being able to take part in the things that others take for granted. I returned home quietly, my heart heavy with the weight of my dreams, but I knew one thing for sure. I wanted to meet that Santa Claus. Just once, I wanted to feel the magic of Christmas in the way that everyone else did. I wasn't sure how or when it would happen, but I promised myself that I would find a way to experience the joy of the season, to have that small moment of happiness that had always seemed just out of reach. Perhaps one day I would have a chance to meet Santa, to speak with him, and ask him for the one thing that I had always wanted: freedom. I knew my father was working tirelessly for our family. He had been waking up early every morning, working long hours, and coming back home only for a few hours of sleep before starting all over again. But what I didn't know was that in the evening he was also taking on another job as Santa Claus in the wealthy neighborhoods of the town. I could see how exhausted he was every day, but he never complained. He never told me the full truth about how hard things had become for him. His love for us was so overwhelming that it made him keep things from me to protect me from the harsh reality of our struggles. He had always kept his burdens to himself, and I had no idea how much he was giving up, how much he was sacrificing, just so I could have a better life. He was always there for me, even when he was at his lowest. Every time he came home, I could see the tiredness in his eyes, but he would still find a way to smile and ask about my day. His love for me, his dedication to making sure I never felt alone, was more than enough to keep me going. One evening, as I was sitting by the window, watching the other children play outside, a deep desire stirred within me. The other kids were running, laughing, kicking their football around. They were so carefree, so full of life. A wave of longing washed over me, and in that moment I wished with all my heart that I could walk like them, run like them. I wished for the ability to stand on my own 2 feet and live a life free of limitations. I wanted to play football, run after the ball, chase the wind like they did. Papa, I wish I could walk. I wish I had 2 legs like the other kids, I thought, feeling my heart ache with the thought. Just as I was lost in my thoughts, Papa entered the room. He looked tired as always, but his smile was kind as he asked, "Lisa, why are you sitting here all alone? It's cold outside. You'll catch a cold. Come inside and rest." I didn't want him to see the sadness in my eyes, but the longing to be like the others was too much. I couldn't hide it. I looked up at him, tears welling up in my eyes. "Papa, I want to be like the other kids. I want to walk. I want to run, just like they do. Why can't I?" I asked, my voice quivering. "Why can't I be like them?" Papa's face softened, and he walked over to me, kneeling down to my level. He placed his hands on my shoulders and looked into my eyes. There was a deep sadness in his gaze, but he didn't say anything about it. Instead, he smiled softly and whispered, "Lisa, my dear, I know you want that. I know you wish things were different, and I wish I could give you everything you want. But sometimes we have to find other ways to be happy. We have to look for happiness in the little things, even when life doesn't give us everything we wish for." He pulled me into a warm embrace. "One day, Lisa, you will be strong enough to carry your dreams. But for now, let me carry you, and let's enjoy what we have. We will make the best of it, together." I nodded, wiping away the tears that had started to fall. My father's words were always a balm for my soul. He always knew how to comfort me, even when things seemed impossible. But deep inside, the ache for a different life never really left. I wanted so much more. I wanted to be like everyone else. I wanted to walk, to run, to chase my dreams without any obstacles. But I also knew that Papa had done more for me than anyone else could. He had given up so much, worked so hard to make sure I could go to school, to make sure I had the chance at a better life. "Papa," I said quietly, "I want to meet Santa Claus. I want to see the man who makes everyone's dreams come true, the man who brings joy and happiness to everyone, especially the rich kids." Papa looked at me, a little surprised, but his smile never faded. "Santa Claus, you say? What would you ask him for, Lisa? What would you want from him?" I took a deep breath, gathering my courage. "I want a new leg, Papa. I want to be able to walk like everyone else. And after that, I want to go to a good school. I want to get a proper education, to get out of this poverty and have a better future. I want to be happy, like the rich kids in the neighborhood." Papa smiled gently and placed his hand on my head. "I will do everything I can to make your dreams come true, Lisa. I promise. But you have to work hard, too. You have to keep believing, and you have to keep moving forward. If you do that, nothing will stop you." I nodded, feeling comforted by his words. But still, there was a part of me that held on to that dream, the hope that Santa Claus could somehow make everything better. That very night, as I lay in my bed trying to sleep, I heard a strange noise. It was coming from the window, a soft creaking sound. I sat up startled and walked over to the window to see what it was. And there, standing in front of me, was Santa Claus. My heart skipped a beat. It couldn't be. I had always heard stories of Santa visiting children on Christmas Eve, but I never thought I would get the chance to meet him in person. Santa Claus, in his red suit and white beard, was standing right there, smiling at me. "Ho, ho, ho," Santa chuckled, his eyes twinkling behind his glasses. "Merry Christmas, Lisa. I hear you have a special wish this year." I gasped in surprise and joy. "Santa, you came for me?" He nodded. "Yes, Lisa. I heard your wish and I brought you something special." Santa reached into his bag and pulled out a small package, wrapped in shiny paper. "This is for you, my dear. It's a gift, just like the ones you see the rich kids getting." With trembling hands, I tore open the wrapping. Inside was a small box of chocolates. I stared at it for a moment, my heart sinking. "Is this it? This is what I get?" I said, feeling a surge of disappointment. I asked for a new leg, for a better life. I wanted to walk like the others. I wanted to be able to live without these crutches. And you give me chocolates? A gift like this doesn't mean anything. Santa's smile faded, and he slowly lifted his hand to his face, removing his mask. And there, in front of me, was my father. I was shocked, unable to speak for a moment. I stared at him, my mind racing. "Papa?" I whispered, my voice barely audible. "Is it really you?" He nodded, tears welling up in his eyes. "Yes, Lisa, it's me. I've been working as Santa Claus at night, performing for the rich people, just to make sure we have enough money to survive. I did it for you, for our family. I wanted to make your Christmas special." I felt a rush of emotions flood through me: surprise, confusion, guilt, and then overwhelming love. My father, the man who had given everything for me, had become Santa Claus to make sure I could have a better life. He had been working late into the night, performing in front of wealthy families, pretending to be Santa Claus just so we could have enough to live on. "I'm so sorry, Papa," I said, tears streaming down my face. "I didn't understand. I didn't know you were doing all of this for us. I didn't know you were sacrificing so much. Please forgive me." Papa pulled me into a hug, holding me tightly. "There's nothing to forgive, Lisa. I did it because I love you. I would do anything to see you happy, to see you succeed. I just want you to have a better life. That's all." I looked at the chocolates in my hands, now realizing how much love had been wrapped into that small gift. I had been so focused on material things, on what I didn't have, that I had forgotten to appreciate what truly mattered: the love, the sacrifice, the dedication of those around me. "I love you, Papa," I whispered. "Thank you. Thank you for everything." He smiled, kissing my forehead. "I love you too, Lisa, always." We stayed there for a long time, just holding each other, and in that moment, I realized that the greatest gift I could ever receive wasn't a new leg or wealth or fancy things. It was the love and sacrifice of my father, the love that had been there all along, in every small gesture, every late-night job, every sacrifice. And I promised myself from that moment on that I would never take it for granted. I would work hard, not just for myself, but to make him proud, to honor the love and effort he had put into my life. The next day was Christmas Eve. My heart was full of excitement, knowing that tonight Santa Claus would visit us and our lives would finally be filled with happiness. I had been waiting for this moment for a long time, hoping that somehow Santa would bring the change I so desperately needed. My father, as always, had left for work early that morning. He hadn't slept at all the night before, and even though it was Christmas Eve, he was still working hard to provide for us. But before he left, he held me close, kissed my forehead, and promised me that everything would be okay. That day, our house smelled different. There was good food being prepared, something we rarely had. My mother was making a special dish, a treat we hadn't had in months, and it filled the house with a warmth I hadn't felt in a long time. It was a rare moment, one that felt almost too good to be true, and I tried to savor every moment of it. But as evening approached, my heart grew heavier with anxiety. Papa hadn't returned home yet, and I began to wonder if he would even come back at all tonight. Mama, as usual, was trying to keep me entertained with stories of her childhood, but my mind was elsewhere, lost in the anticipation of what the night could bring. I longed for Santa's magic to transform our lives. That night, as I tried to fall asleep, the room seemed to glow with an otherworldly light. The soft glow grew brighter and brighter, as if some miracle was about to happen. My pulse quickened, and I felt as though something incredible was about to unfold. I had no idea what it would be, but I could sense it. The air felt different, charged with energy, almost like the very essence of hope had filled the room. As I lay there, staring at the ceiling, my mind drifting between sleep and wakefulness, I suddenly heard a soft rustling sound. I felt my heart race in excitement. Was it Santa Claus? Was he finally here? I quickly opened my eyes, and in the dim light, I saw something incredible, a new leg, neatly placed beside my bed. At first, I didn't believe my eyes. I rubbed them and looked again. There it was, a new artificial leg, just like the one I had always wanted. The miracle I had been hoping for had finally come true. For a moment, I just sat there, in stunned silence, my mind racing to comprehend what was happening. Santa Claus had really come, and he had given me exactly what I had asked for, a new leg. I could hardly believe it. My joy was boundless. This was the Christmas gift of a lifetime, more than just a material gift. It was a chance for me to walk, to stand on my own 2 feet, and to live a life I had only dreamed of. As I sat up in bed and reached for the leg, I felt a surge of gratitude and disbelief. Was this really happening? Had Santa truly come to make my wish come true? The leg was light but sturdy, crafted perfectly for my body. I couldn't wait to try it on. I felt a rush of hope, a surge of optimism as I stood up for the first time without the support of crutches. It was a strange feeling, but also an incredibly liberating one. I took a few tentative steps around the room, amazed by the feeling of standing on my own. My joy was overwhelming. For the first time in my life, I felt like I could be like everyone else. I could walk. I could stand. I could move without the burden of my old crutches. The possibilities felt endless. I had no words to express how I felt. It was as if all the pain, all the longing, had been replaced by a feeling of freedom that I had never known before. I couldn't wait to show my parents. As I hobbled down the hallway toward the living room, I could hear my mother's voice, calling out softly as if she were waiting for me. "Lisa, are you awake? It's Christmas Eve. Come here, my dear." I walked slowly into the room, my new leg supporting me. My mother looked up in surprise as I entered. She blinked, staring at me in disbelief for a moment, and then her face broke into a wide smile. "Lisa, is that you?" she asked, her voice filled with wonder. "You're walking." I nodded, a huge grin on my face. "Yes, Mama, look, I can walk. Santa gave me a new leg." My mother rushed over to me, tears welling up in her eyes. She held me tight, squeezing me in a loving embrace. "Oh, my darling, this is such a miracle. I am so happy for you," she cried, her voice thick with emotion. Just then, the door opened, and Papa walked in. He looked tired, but his face lit up as soon as he saw me standing there, walking without crutches. "Lisa, is that really you?" he asked, his voice filled with shock and joy. "You're walking? How is that possible?" I smiled and pointed to the leg. "Santa brought it for me, Papa. He gave me a new leg for Christmas." Papa's face softened, and he stepped forward, kneeling down in front of me. He touched my new leg gently and then hugged me tightly. "I knew he would bring you something special," he said softly, his voice breaking. "You've been so strong, Lisa. You deserve this more than anyone else." I held him close, feeling the love in his embrace. This was the best Christmas I could have ever asked for. It wasn't just the new leg or the gift from Santa. It was the joy of being able to share this moment with my parents, who had always stood by me, no matter what. I realized in that moment that Christmas was about more than just gifts. It was about the love and sacrifice that we shared as a family. It was about the hope that we had, even in the darkest of times. The next morning, as the sun began to rise, I woke up early and looked out the window. The world seemed different somehow, brighter, more alive. I felt a sense of renewal, of new beginnings. I could walk now. I could do things I had never imagined I could. And most importantly, I felt that my life had changed forever, all thanks to the love of my father and the miracle of Christmas. As the day went on, Papa sat with me, showing me how to use the new leg properly. It felt strange at first, but I was determined to learn. Every step I took felt like a victory, and with each one, I felt more confident. Papa told me that the money we had received along with the leg would help me with my education. He encouraged me to use it wisely, to study hard, and to always strive for a better future. For the first time in my life, I felt a sense of hope, a belief that my dreams could come true. The road ahead would still be hard, but I knew that I wasn't alone. My family was with me, and together we could face anything. That Christmas Eve, when Santa brought me my new leg, he gave me more than just a physical gift. He gave me a chance to live a fuller, more independent life. But most importantly, he reminded me that no matter how hard things got, there was always hope. And that, more than anything else, was the greatest gift of all. With the new leg, life had taken a turn for the better. I felt like I was standing tall again, ready to face the world. My confidence returned, and for the first time in a long while, I could breathe easier. My grades improved drastically. I had been struggling for so long, but now, with my newfound independence and a sense of purpose, I excelled in my studies. I was no longer just the girl who could barely walk, the girl everyone pitied or mocked. I became a student who earned first position in every class, and every teacher praised my efforts. But amidst all the newfound joy and success, a shadow lingered over our home. My father, who had always been my pillar of strength, began to feel weaker each day. His health started deteriorating, and no matter how hard he tried to hide it, I could see the strain. There were days when he looked exhausted, as though he had been carrying the weight of the world on his shoulders for far too long. One day, as I was preparing for my 10th grade exams, I overheard a conversation between my mother and a doctor. I wasn't supposed to hear it, but the words pierced through my heart, and I couldn't ignore them. The doctor was telling my mother that my father's kidneys were failing. His condition was critical, and there was no easy solution. My father had already sold one of his kidneys years ago on Christmas to help us survive. It turned out that the kidney he had donated years ago had failed, and now the remaining one was no longer functioning either. I was devastated. My father had always put us first, sacrificed everything for us. The news that his health was failing broke me. I couldn't stop the tears from flowing. My dreams, my future, the very foundation of my life had always been built on the sacrifices of this man. The realization that he might not be there to see me achieve my goals was overwhelming. I remember sitting in my room trying to process the news, my mind racing. My father had given up so much for us. He had made sure that I had every chance to succeed, even if it meant sacrificing his own health. He had worked tirelessly to put food on the table, to make sure I had a future. And yet, I had no way of repaying him for all his sacrifices. He had given me everything, and in return, I couldn't even save him. I felt powerless. In the days that followed, my father's health continued to decline. It was hard to watch the man who had been my hero for so long, the one who had always been so strong and full of life, slowly fade away. But despite his illness, he never stopped encouraging me. He would tell me, "You're going to be someone special, Lisa. Don't ever give up on your dreams. Make me proud." His words became my motivation. Even when I saw him struggling to breathe, even when he could barely move without pain, he kept smiling, telling me to keep going. His strength, despite his suffering, was something I could never forget. It inspired me to push through my own struggles. I started studying harder than ever, determined to fulfill the dreams he had for me, the dreams he'd given so much for. But then, one day, it happened. My father passed away, quietly and peacefully, in his sleep. The world felt like it had come crashing down around me. There was a deafening silence in the house, and it was as if the light had gone out of my life forever. Losing him felt like losing everything. I couldn't imagine a life without him. His absence left an empty void that no one could fill. Before he passed away, my father had made a will. He had asked my mother to give it to me when the time came. His final words were etched in my heart forever. "Promise me, Lisa, that you will always strive to be the best. Promise me that you will make my name proud. You have the potential to do great things. Don't ever let your dreams slip away." I kept that promise. My father's legacy became my guiding light, and every success I achieved was a tribute to him. It wasn't easy, and there were times when I wanted to give up. But I remembered his words. His sacrifice was too great for me to let go of the dream he had had for me. As time went on, I focused on my education and continued to work hard. Slowly but surely, I began to carve out a path for myself. I didn't want to just be successful. I wanted to be successful for him, to honor his memory. I made sure that every step I took in life was one that would make him proud. And as I moved forward, I never stopped thinking of him. I felt him with me, his love, his strength, his sacrifices all guiding me toward the future. My father's passing was a turning point in my life, but it also marked the beginning of my journey to greatness. I graduated with honors, and eventually I found work in a field that I loved. The financial struggles we had faced were no longer a constant worry, and I was able to help support my mother. We were no longer living in poverty. My dream of a better life had come true, and it was all thanks to the sacrifices my father had made. But the greatest achievement of all was the foundation I set up in my father's name. I knew that he had always cared about others, always believed in helping those who were less fortunate. So I created a charity to support orphaned children, a cause that was very dear to his heart. I used the money he had left behind to fund scholarships, to build schools, and to ensure that no child would ever have to go through what we had endured. I wanted to make sure that his legacy lived on, that his sacrifices were not in vain. Today, when I think of my father, I think of him as my true hero. He was the one who taught me what it means to be strong, to work hard, and to always put others first. He was the one who believed in me when I didn't believe in myself. He was the one who made sure I had a future, even when it seemed impossible. And because of him, I am who I am today. His spirit lives on in everything I do. Whenever I face challenges in life, I think of him and remember the strength he showed, even in his final days. I remember his smile, his determination, and his love for me. And I know that no matter what happens, I will always be my father's daughter. He will always be with me in my heart, in my actions, and in my every success. My real hero was not just the man who gave me life. He was the man who gave me hope. He was the man who showed me that no matter how difficult life may be, there is always a way forward, as long as you have the will to keep going. My father was, and always will be, my true hero. And no matter where life takes me, I will make sure to carry his love, his lessons, and his legacy with me forever. I miss you, Papa. Your love and sacrifices will never be forgotten. If this story has inspired you, don't forget to leave your thoughts in the comments below. I'd love to hear your own stories of resilience and strength. And make sure to hit the subscribe button and press the bell icon for more heartfelt stories. Your support means the world to me, and I can't wait to share more with you. Thank you for being part of this journey with me.